Thank you, Thor. Professor Rögnvaldur, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. So I am Daði Már Kristoffersson, the Dean of the School of Social Sciences here at the University of Iceland. We co-host this event in honor of Rögnvaldur jointly with the Department of Economics, as Thor explained, and the Research Center for Innovation and Economic Growth. Now, today we honor Rögnvaldur and his contribution. The topic for discussion, as Thor mentioned, is environmental protection and resource management on a global scale. And these topics are, of course, of tremendous importance. I need not remind people here that we are about 7.3 billion on the Earth currently, expected to increase in number to about 9 billion by the middle of this century. So roughly there are about 200,000 more people to dinner tonight than there were yesterday. Now we face the challenge of meeting the wants and needs of this growing number with a limited resource base. So these are now small topics we are dealing with. We are dealing with such fundamental questions as, can we have sustainable growth, and how do we make that happen? Now, resource markets, environmental problems are central to all these questions. We know that, and central to as a subject for economists. Market failures in many markets are widespread for environmental goods and many natural resources as well. We have environmental challenges such as climate change we need to deal with in some meaningful way. We can probably state that it is technically possible to only, if we take that limited example, feed 9 billion people on the Earth. But we have to try to do that in some sustainable way. And the ecological footprint, for example, of the current agricultural system of the world is quite enormous. So solutions depend on sensible development and use of technology and solutions to reduce market failure. And these actions, whatever they may be, involve trade-offs in terms of short-run and long-run growth, if you take one stand, growth and conservation, if you take another, or in short, the distribution of benefits and costs in time and space. So debate on what should be focused on and how to balance different actions is therefore very important. Many researchers have addressed these issues and have views on solutions which vary greatly. Today we focus on some of the contributions Professor Rögnvaldur has made to this debate. So Professor Rögnvaldur was born in Iceland, grew up in Höfn, as we discussed earlier here, but has lived most of his life, has had most of his career abroad. He took his doctorate in economics from the University of Lund in Sweden in 1974. He went from Lund to Tromsø in Norway and from Tromsø to Bergen, where he actually stayed. So he started at the University of Bergen, but in 1983 he became professor of fisheries economics at the Norwegian School of Economics, and he stayed there until he retired in 2013. During his long career, Professor Rögnvaldur has published numerous articles in distinguished international journals such as the European Economic Review, Scandinavian Journal of Economics, Journal of Environmental Economics and Management, Land Economics, and I could keep on counting for a fairly long time. He has also published 9 books on many topics related to fisheries management, the management of energy resources and oil, and general environmental issues. We have been fortunate enough to have Professor Hannesson as a guest professor at the Department of Economics, actually since its beginning. And it is an honor to participate in this event today and ask Rögnvaldur Hannesson to come up to the podium and give us his views. The floor is yours.
So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thanks to Daði for his very kind words. This conference came as a total surprise to me, so I asked myself, what have I done to make myself worthy of this? Well, I have published a book recently, the title of which you have up on the screen. I know that some people at this university have read the book and liked it, and I'm very grateful for that. But I don't expect everyone to agree with the book. This is not a book written to please everybody. And if it did, it would have been a waste of time. It's a polemic book against some people who I think are trying to lead us down the wrong road, and who they are and what they are doing. What is eco-fundamentalism? Well, within our lifetime, within my lifetime, we have seen the environmental movement emerge and grow. And so we can ask, has it made the world a better place, as it purports to do? And my short answer to that is no. But there are caveats. Environmentalism is a very broad concept. And it is highly misleading, as many people do, to refer to the environmental movement with capital letters. There are many kinds of environmentalists, and they all have different opinions about the same things. It's a very broad spectrum. And if I were to characterize the opposite ends of that broad spectrum, this is what I would come up with. We have what I call constructive environmentalists, those who think that we need to take care of nature in our own interest. And it is, of course, true that we all live from nature in one way and another. That's where we grow our food. That's where we fetch our raw materials. We have to do this with intelligence and avoid over-exploiting nature. Now, this may sound self-evident and uncontroversial, but the problem is that many people often have incentives to over-exploit nature. If anybody and everybody can go fishing wherever they want to, that is well known to lead to over-exploitation of fish stocks. Now, Icelanders know this better than most, and they have come to grips with this problem better than most. But the fact of the matter is that without an appropriate framework of organization, fish stocks will become overexploited and possibly even extinguished. If we can use nature as a free repository for our waste products, that's what some people are going to do. So therefore we have to set certain limits about emissions of waste products and such things, as has been done over the decades since I first became interested in these issues. There is no doubt that environmentalism has increased our awareness of these problems and contributed to their solutions. Our cities have become cleaner, Our waterways, likewise, have become cleaner. We have found methods to manage our fish stocks in a useful way. But then there is another sort of environmentalism, which I call eco-fundamentalism. And that's what is the title of my book. And in their view, we need to take care of nature not for our own sake, but for the sake of nature itself. We need to protect wild animals, even though they are a nuisance and a pest, and dangerous to our life and limbs. I'm sure that many of you have heard about Cecil the lion, which put a hapless American dentist into a quandary because he happened to shoot it unauthorized. Big uproar in the United States, and he had to go underground for a long time. Africans know this better. They know that lions and elephants are pests, which threaten their existence and trample down their vegetation. Now, I find this mindset extremely anti-human. I have a hard time thinking of anything that is more anti-human than this mindset. Putting nature above man and putting well-being of animals above the well-being of humans. I don't know how many people there are in places like Africa that every year are killed by crocodiles, lions, and even elephants without causing any uproar whatsoever. In contrast to this hapless American dentist who happened to shoot Cecil the lion. Now, some people have said to me on this point that, well, this is very much a minority opinion. And you're fighting, you're banging on open doors. Well, I wish it were true. I wish it were true. My impression, on the other hand, is that this mindset percolates through and influences many people who really want to be and are constructive environmentalists and want to preserve nature in our interest and not in the interest of nature itself. It also seems to me that the people who are paraded through the mass media, day in and day out, very often are environmentalists of the eco-fundamentalist kind. So I don't think it is a waste of time to address their worldview and theories and fight against it in our own interest. I'm going to talk about 4 issues where I think environmentalism, extreme environmentalism, leads us astray. And these 4 issues are climate change, genetically modified foods, fisheries and aquaculture, and the research agenda of resource economics. And I think that in all these 4 areas we see the unwanted influence of the eco-fundamentalist way of thinking. And let me begin with global warming or climate change. It's interesting, by the way, that global warming seems to have morphed over the years into something called climate change. Maybe it's conscious so that you can get it right whatever happens, although that is perhaps a little bit too malicious interpretation. But in any case, it seems to be that what we call global warming is the major concern of people who talk about climate change. Now, there are enormous uncertainties surrounding surrounding global warming. First of all, there is the question how much of this is due to human activities. There is no question that since about 1800, when temperatures began to be taken regularly around the globe, there is no question that since then there has been an increase in the average temperature. Although it is a debate unto itself whether the averages are taken correctly and whether this is measured correctly and all of that, but I think I'll take it as a given that average temperatures have increased over this time period. Well, it has not been an uninterrupted increase. The temperatures increased quite substantially in the 1920s and 30s. And then they actually fell in the 1950s and particularly 60s. And as many of you will remember, it was in the 1960s that the drift ice from the north started coming again, having to do with the global cooling off that happened. It hadn't occurred since the 1880s, I believe, that this drift ice came to the shores of this country. So in that time frame, there has been an increase. But if you look further back, it's not so clear. Some of this increase has happened since what we call the last Little Ice Age, which was in the 1600s. Now, I happen to grow up with the glacier of Vatnajökull in sight almost every day. Exaggerating a little bit, I can say I saw it shrink before my eyes. So there is clearly an evidence that probably there has been warming taking place. But if you go into the Glacier Museum in Hub, which is very nicely designed, you'll read, the glaciologist will tell you that, well, earlier on, this glacier used to be smaller, probably much smaller. So what we may have been seeing over the last 200 years is nothing other than normal recovery of temperatures after the Little Ice Age in the 1600s. And there is much evidence indicating that earlier, in around the year 1000, temperatures might even have been higher than they are now. This is called the medieval warm period. And by the way, this is the period when Iceland got settled. And why did it get settled? Some people say, and I think they probably have a point, the harvest grew bigger because of overwarming. And there was an excess supply of angry young men that everywhere and always means trouble. No land for these angry young men. So what did they do? Well, found a new place is one part of the answer. The other part is piracy. And some of them did both. If you read the first part of Njál's saga, there's an excellent CV of an enterprising young Icelander who becomes a pirate, practices piracy for a while, and then goes back to his original place to pursue more peaceful farming. So that was the medieval warm period, and if you go a little bit further back, let's say 5,000 years or so, you will find a still warmer period. Some glaciologists believe that the glaciers in southern Norway disappeared during that period. So the point is, there's always been variability in climate without any cause whatsoever from human activities. So it remains a question, how much of the warming that we are seeing now is caused by human activities? I put up here a slide from the latest report from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this summarizes the output of several climate models. Now, much of the warming that is being predicted by these models is built into the models themselves. This is caused by so-called feedback, positive feedback effects. It's caused by clouds. There are supposed to be more clouds emerging. If the world warms up, and these clouds are expected to increase the warming effect, increase the greenhouse effect. Well, the problem is that there are different types of clouds. Some clouds have a cooling effect, and the other type has a warming effect. So it's very hard to tell which is which, and which is the strongest. And it is that uncertainty which partly is reflected in this very considerable span of predictions that these climate models make. What's interesting to notice is that the development of the global temperature the last 16, 17 years has been at the lower end of these predictions. The actual development of the average temperature in the world has not been in the middle of this predicted area that you can find from these models. It's been at the lower end. And some people take that as an indication that the climate is not as sensitive, temperature is not as sensitive to emissions of greenhouse gases as some people have thought them to be. So that's the first part of the uncertainty around global warming. Very difficult to tell how much warming is going to result from our continuous release of greenhouse gases. Then comes the second uncertainty. What will the consequences be? Do we have an ideal climate? Do we have the optimal climate? I'm not so sure. I don't think Icelanders would mind a little bit of warming, do they? And, one effect of increased concentration of carbon dioxide is a more rapid growth of plants. You can even read in the IPCC report itself that the yield of maize and wheat might increase by something like 10% if the concentration of carbon dioxide is doubled from its pre-industrial level. And some people actually think that they see evidence of this happening, which, incidentally, if it is true, would contribute to solving the problem of feeding the billions, as Daði mentioned originally. So that's the second uncertainty. Now, I think I could add to that some places probably will get warmer, some places will get colder, some countries will gain, others will lose. That, I think, we can be pretty sure. And that certainly is not going to make it any easier to deal with this problem, as we are going to see from the Paris conference that is going to be held in December. And then comes the third uncertainty. How can we adjust to this? Climate has always been variable. People have always had to adjust to a changing climate. Now, it so happens that we are better equipped than ever before to adjust to a changing climate. We have a technology that we didn't have 200 years ago. My favorite example is California. Everyone who has been to California, I'm sure, is impressed by what a great place this is. What a wonderful place. Now, if you were dependent only on your two hands and nature, California would be the last place on earth you would want to be. Nothing grows without irrigation. There isn't all that much fish in the sea, some. You will starve to death. This is why California was empty of people when the first European settlers came there. But now, what makes California livable and so marvelous is technology. It's irrigation, air conditioning, warming in case you need it, cars, not the least. This is what makes California such a great place. Now, this is a bit interesting diagram, I would say. It shows you the emissions of carbon dioxide due to fossil fuels and cement since 1850. And it is on a logarithmic scale, which is interesting because the straight parts of this curve, they show you uninterrupted constant growth. And you can notice 3 periods of uninterrupted constant growth. The first period is from 1850 to early last century. Now this is the Industrial Revolution, with all the improved standards of living that came with it. And then comes another one after 1945. These are the golden years after the Second World War, with uninterrupted growth in the rich part of the world. And the last part is the development of China since, well, 1980 or thereabout. So increased emissions of carbon dioxide and improvements in economic growth and standard of living go hand in hand. There are 2 periods that you can see here which are not so nice. The first is the Great Depression, when emissions of carbon dioxide declined. The second is the first and second oil crisis in the 1970s and the associated recession. So in case the leaders of the world want to do something serious about emissions of carbon dioxide, this is the recipe. Fortunately, they seem to be doing something quite different, because I guess most of them realize that it is simply not possible to maintain our civilization and standard of living without fossil fuels, which, unfortunately, you might say, leads to these emissions of carbon dioxide. I have heard the argument that we should do this, that, and the other thing about global warming, about the releases of greenhouse gases, just as a piece of insurance in case things go really bad. We might be better off doing some precautionary things. Well, would you buy an insurance policy if it costs you more than building a new house? I doubt it. But that's very much what I'm afraid of with these insurance policies that we're supposed to take out for emissions of carbon dioxide. They are going to be more expensive, more costly than the eventual benefit which might result from them. Well, in any case, emissions continue to increase unabated. This is on a little bit shorter time scale. This diagram that you can see up here. You can see an almost uninterrupted increase in carbon dioxide emissions. You can also notice that China has now overtaken the United States as the major emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. Now, some people would say that the fact that carbon dioxide emissions have declined relatively in the United States is a harbinger of what will happen when China and other countries grow rich. Well, their production will become less carbon dioxide intensive, to put it that way, and so we will see their emissions also decline. And there is undoubtedly some truth in that. As economies grow to become more service intensive, they make less industrial production, relatively speaking, and the carbon dioxide content of their production goes down. Well, one reason why the carbon dioxide accounts look so nice for rich countries is that they have outsourced the production of carbon dioxide intensive products to other countries, like China particularly. One British economist has tried to make a calculation of carbon dioxide emissions in Great Britain on the basis of consumption rather than production. His conclusion is that the carbon dioxide emissions in Great Britain have increased by something like 14% over a certain period, instead of declining by 15% over the same period. So the carbon dioxide profile doesn't look nearly as good for the rich countries of the world if you look at the consumption side of things. Now, the reason why that is not done, as far as I understand, is that it's awfully difficult to do. It's difficult enough to do this on the basis of production, but more difficult still to do it on the basis of consumption. Now, here are two empirical relationships that you can have a look at. One is the relationship between the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and temperature. And this is a very suggestive relationship. There is certainly a positive correlation between the two. But in the lower diagram that you see an even more impressive correlation between two things: economic growth and the emission of carbon dioxide. The two go very closely together. So again, if we want to maintain economic growth, there is no other way than to continue burning fossil fuels, increasing carbon dioxide emissions. And particularly if we want to lift the poor countries of the world out of their poverty. That is going to take an enormous increase in the use of energy and the release of carbon dioxide. Now here are a couple of diagrams that show you where our energy is coming from. And you can see from the one furthest to the right that we get most of our primary energy from fossil fuels. We get about 87%. And this has been fairly constant for a long time. So-called other renewables, which everybody is talking about, wind and solar, they hardly matter at all. You hardly see them. They are together responsible for something like 2.5% of the total primary energy that we use. In the other diagram that I've shown you is I've divided the share of the fossil fuels by 10 so that you can see this better. One interesting thing is that the growth that we have seen in the production of other renewables has mainly come at the expense of nuclear energy. It has made had very little effect on the share of fossil fuels. And that should be a reason for worry for those who worry about climate change or global warming, because if there is any credible alternative to fossil fuels to avoid global warming, that would be nuclear energy. But for some funny reason, most environmentalists seem to be against nuclear energy too. So I have a hard time seeing that anything drastic will happen over the next decades that will change this picture between other renewables and fossil fuels. Now, all this worry about global warming leads us to, or have led some governments to make rather foolish decisions. Development of uncompetitive wind power and solar power. Some people would have you believe that wind power is close to becoming competitive with fossil fuels. Well, not necessarily if you take into account that you have to have a backup for other renewables, like solar and wind. The wind doesn't blow all the time. And it has a habit of not blowing when it's cold and miserable in Europe. In the winter, there's a high pressure area over Western Europe. Of course, it's cold, no wind. You'd better fire up our coal power plants. Another alternative that has been used is biofuels. Having our cars eat our food, not a very good idea. I believe that close to half of the American production of maize, corn, is now used for ethanol. And even so, the carbon dioxide gains on the whole from the production of this ethanol are highly doubtful. Palm oil is not better. You may remember that back in 2007 or 8, something like that, there were food riots, both in Indonesia and Mexico, because of the effect of growing of palm oil for biofuels and maize for biofuels. Increased the price temporarily for palm oil and for maize. Norwegians are doing some astonishingly foolish things, like electrifying their oil platforms, stretching cables from shore to the oil platforms. Instead of using locally available gas, which then, because you don't use it yourself, you export it to other countries. So it will be burned anyway. The only effect is to make the Norwegian carbon dioxide accounts look a little bit better, at a huge expense. And then comes saving the rainforest. Again, the Norwegians have been pouring money into to some of the most corrupt governments of the world to save the rainforest. They seem to be burning them up anyway. If you look at the papers, seeing what is happening in Singapore, everybody's drowning in haze from forest fire in Indonesia. But you may also ask, well, why this? What have the Europeans and the Americans done with the forest? Chop them down, burn them off, to build their cities, to build their farms. It's just that some countries are a little bit later to this game than others. This is what they're doing in the Amazonas and in Indonesia, making plantations in areas which used to be covered by the rainforest. Often done by people of small means who are trying to make a living out of something. But now, this is being frowned upon by those who were the first. All right, I'll come to the second point, genetically modified foods. This is another area where the influence of eco-fundamentalism have been well, not benign at all. Genetically modified foods have never shown to be dangerous. They are grown in various places in the world, even in the United States, to a considerable extent. Corn, soybeans, again, they've never been shown to be dangerous. What is often invoked here is the so-called precautionary principle. We shouldn't do anything that might, just might, have some bad effect, some side effect. Now the problem with this paralyzing principle, as some people have called it, is that it takes away from us one very important source of learning. What do we learn from if not our mistakes? Now, I'm not saying that we should do anything, certainly not anything outrageous, just to try to learn from it. We must have some idea about where things will lead. But using any hypothetical, minor, possible danger as a pretext for not doing something, I think is a decidedly bad idea. There's a myth coming down to us from the Stone Age. Late in the evening, a Stone Age woman says to her husband, "Darling, stop honing that flint stone. You never know where it might end." Now, this is serious because the world population is still growing. We still need more food to feed this increasing world population. The genetically modified foods, this is the green revolution of our time. The green revolution has largely run its course, but the population is still increasing, we need something new. That's where genetically modified foods come into the picture. I remember back in my high school days, India was supposed to be a basket case of a country that would never be able to feed itself. And then came the Green Revolution. And to the right here I show the development of wheat production in the world and in India. And you can see how the wheat production grew in India much faster than in the rest of the world, even though the growth in the rest of the world was quite impressive. And India turned from a basket case dependent on American aid to being self-sufficient. and even sometimes exporting wheat to other countries. And we need something similar for the world today. I also show here an interesting diagram of the growth of world population to the left. You can see how the growth rate of world population has been declining over the years, and these horrible scenarios described by Paul Ehrlich and some other people have not materialized, partly because of increased food production, but also because of lower growth rates of world population. If this goes on, world population will stabilize at 8.5 billion in about the middle of the century, if it goes on. And that's still a hell of a lot. We still need a lot of food to feed all that population. Fisheries and aquaculture. This is the environmentalists' vision of the oceans. A theme park. Fish of various sizes. Big fish eat the small fish. The seabirds, they eat some fish. Whales and the seals. I'm very happy now that there is a place for an oil platform up in the corner as a part of this environment. Well, should there be no fish on our plates? The environmentalist notions have gotten traction in the highest of places. Not so long ago, there was an initiative by the World Bank to set in motion development of fisheries in the poor countries of the world. And they set up a committee to investigate these issues. And one of the people they put on this committee was an American environmentalist woman who says that we shouldn't eat fish at all. Now, what sort of a fisheries development? Poor countries want to make sense of their fisheries, produce food for themselves, or something to sell to others. What sort of development would that mean? But this is just one example of how eco-fundamentalist thinking has made inroads for the worse into the highest of places. The environmentalist view seems often to be that fish should be preserved to feed marine mammals and seabirds. This is what some people mean when they are talking about the ecosystem approach to fisheries. Now, ecosystem approach to fisheries makes perfect sense. As I said, the big fish eat the small fish. So the question is, where should we harvest? What should we take? The big one or the small one? Well, we should take out the big ones, unless the transfer of material through the food chain gives us a better flesh, more valuable product by being passed on to the fish high up in the chain. Makes good sense. But this is not what people often mean when they talk about the ecosystem approach to fisheries. A few years ago, there came out a report by the American Lenfest Foundation about world fisheries. And if you take that seriously, I think we can safely say that most of the South African sardine fisheries and the Peruvian anchovy fisheries would be gone. Because there are some very rare species of birds which just might be put in danger by all this fishing of the sardine and the anchovy. Now, this report was hailed as a major insight by the editorial page of the New York Times. If you ever want to look for nonsense about fisheries, you could do worse than looking at the editorial page of the New York Times. Whenever seldom they look into these matters. But that's another issue. But that would be one example of an ecosystem approach to fisheries for the benefits of some animals, some iconic animals that we might want to preserve. Now that gets me then to the next point, and that is aquaculture. the sardine fisheries in South Africa and the anchovy fishery in Peru, these fisheries produce fish meal, which is, much of it is used in aquaculture, fish farming. Now, fish farming is one of the areas which environmentalists have loved to hate and have put a lot of energy into criticizing. Let me mention here 3 false arguments that you typically see from these quarters. One is that fish farming encourages overexploitation. And the reason goes as follows, that increased farming of fish will increase the demand for fish feed. Fish feed comes from fish meal, and that again will increase the overexploitation of fish stocks. And this would be true if fish stocks were not managed. But it so happens that the fisheries of Peru and South Africa, they are managed by fish quotas, just as you do in this country. And so we have not seen any appreciable increase in the production of fish meal over the last 15, 20 years, despite an enormous increase in the production of farmed fish. Now, this has happened because the fish producers have been able, and the feed producers have been able to find substitutes for fish meal and become less and less dependent on it. It's also happened because fish meal used to be used in feed blends for agriculture, for raising pigs and poultry, and much of the fish meal has been diverted from those uses to the growing of fish. The second false argument is that this can take food away from people. Instead of feeding the fish to people, we're feeding it to other fish. Well, it just so happens that sardines and anchovy were never eaten to any appreciable extent by the people living in the countries which now pursue these fisheries. And if we wanted to use these fish to feed the world population, we would have to be very careful. These fish are caught in warm waters. They are fatty and bony. You would have to take them very quickly and process them in order to make them into edible human food, edible food for humans. It would be much better to feed the world population, feed the world's poor in some other way than with sardines and anchovy. And then we have finally the argument that salmon farming threatens the wild salmon stocks because of parasites that bloom in these fish pens that we have in the fjords, and then they find their way to the wild fish stocks. Well, to what extent this happens is an open question. But if it happens, it would be an interesting piece of arithmetic to look at which one gives you the greatest benefit. The salmon farming or the capture of the wild salmon. I have my doubts about whether the capture of wild salmon would be able to compensate those who raise the fish in farms, so that we should not do that and rather use the wild salmon. Anyway, the diagram that you see here in the bottom to the right shows you the development of world fish catch, fish production. Many people like to talk about the crisis in world fisheries. If you look at a diagram like this, you will have a hard time identifying the crisis. Where is it? Capture fisheries have stagnated for the last 20, 30 years because we have come to the end of the road as far as it goes to take material out of the sea. So the increase in fish production has come from farmed fish. And that is very likely going to continue for the next not so few years. I'm not saying that individual fish stocks could not be overexploited, but overall, we don't see any effect of overexploitation of fish stocks. We see stagnation, but that's a different thing. And then I come to non-market valuation, what I call a biased research agenda. Well, not everything is valued on markets. Not everything is transacted in markets. There are many things that have value which are not transacted over markets, but have value nevertheless. Recreational facilities, nature itself, all these things have values, and in the absence of markets, we will have to try and measure these values somehow. Now, the problem is that the methodology of doing this has an inbuilt bias for preservation. And it comes from the fact that there is never any money put on the table in these valuations. You can ask people, how much are you willing to pay for this, that, and the other thing? Some environmental good. And if that person knows that he is not going to have to pay anything, and if he values the environmental good, what he's going to say? He's going to exaggerate his willingness to pay. There was one interesting investigation done in Norway many, many years ago, trying to expose this. People were asked, how much are you willing to pay in support of a certain environmental organization? And they were clearly given the understanding that they didn't have to pay what they said they were willing to pay. They were just asked, how much are you willing to pay? And they came up with answers, and then a bit later some of them were sent a check. They were sent an invoice and asked to pay what they had said they were willing to pay. And some reacted with outrage. What? Are you asking us to pay? You told us this was an investigation. Others did pay. But in any case, they were all necessary indications that the willingness to pay was exaggerated if people thought that they would not have to pay. And then there is the other source of bias, due to the fact that no money is ever put on the table. You can use the same dollar over and over and over again to preserve things that you think are worthwhile preserving. You might take, say, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska. It has become a fetish for American environmentalists not to have any oil drilling going on in this area, because it's supposed to be harmful for the caribou, for the reindeer that are running around. Actually, I've been out there myself. I saw the reindeer sheltering under the pipelines from the sun, because the pipelines are overground. And something similar would happen in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge if you were ever going to drill there, because it's right nearby. So the footprint of the oil extraction in this area is very light. It's very light. But anyway, I'm sure that there would be many people in the lower 48s saying that they would be willing to pay so and so much for ensuring that the poor caribou would still exist. And the Alaskans want the oil out, but they are not very many, so they wouldn't count for a great deal. And then you could ask the same thing about the famous pebble mine in Alaska, which has been a cliffhanger for many years. In Bristol Bay, it's alleged to, if it were to be developed, it is alleged to be harmful for the salmon fisheries in Bristol Bay. And that's a more substantive issue, but in any case, once you have put the Arctic Wildlife Refuge aside, you would go and prevent the development of the pebble mine with the same money. You know, first we take Manhattan, then we take Berlin. So what you end up doing, following this methodology, is that you are comparing values that exist nowhere else than in people's fantasy with actual livelihoods and production that would otherwise take place. And that I find highly dubious. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think I have come to about the end of my talk. I'm going to end on this note. You might say that bad ideas will be weeded out by the Darwinism of ideas. Bad ideas will be weeded out if they are put into practice, because they will show themselves not to be workable, like socialism. But it took a long time to get rid of it. And there was, in the meantime, even after it was evident that it didn't work, there was the nomenclatura and some others who had an interest in prolonging this type of society. So it can be a long and costly process to wait for the social Darwinism to weed out the bad ideas. And that's why I think that we need to fight the eco-fundamentalist ideas. There are many people who like to make a constructive contribution to the environment. That is a very praiseworthy thing to do, absolutely. And we have seen many good things come of that. But let's be careful to avoid the pitfalls of eco-fundamentalism. We need to take care of nature. Nobody should be in doubt of that. That should be fairly uncontroversial. We need to clean up our mess. But we need to do it for our own sake and not for the sake of nature itself. And with those words, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude.